Good morning. Matrix Decoded Theory of Everything. Today I like to speak about the importance to understand theory of everything, the importance to understand how to decode matrix in order to face the crises we are observing in these times. Within the next video I will try to come back to Planck and Einstein and to explain the mistake in the theory of general relativity. So today we have somehow science that is claiming to explain nature, to explain society, to be responsible to give us information about how to act in politics or in our social contexts. But science is in a crisis because the both main theories in theoretical physics, that is quantum theory and theory of general relativity, don't fit together. So there is a lot of confusion if there is a theory of everything or if not. But science, we can say, is in a crisis. We have the climate is getting hotter, and we call this a crisis. And there is a lot of fight about who's wrong or right. There is a claim that science is sure. The majority of scientists is sure about that. CO2 is responsible, is causing the climate to get hotter. There is a claim that a majority of scientists, the IPCC, is sure that man-made CO2 is responsible, and there is some minority that claims that CO2 or man-made CO2 is not responsible for climate getting hotter. I already explained in my videos that due to theory of everything, it is impossible to claim that CO2 in general is heating up the planet or the atmosphere. This is not possible. So we have a crisis there because some youth movement, for example, Fridays for Future, Extinction Rebellion or others, are claiming to know how to solve the problem and to become like extremism on this. Then we have actual a crisis on the coronavirus. Crisis also in all societies or nations on this planet. There are minorities claiming that the lockdown is not necessary. There are people claiming that corona is very dangerous. There are people claiming that corona is not that dangerous. So it belongs also, those two crises belongs also to the crisis in science. And then we have politics, which is in crisis for sure in Europe as well as so the European Union is in crisis on how to focus for the future, to look into to to work together with China or to work together with USA or what European Union should be in future. There is crisis in USA between Obama Gate, the Trump administration, the Democrats and the Republicans, and also there is of course a crisis in religion. Some claim we must be only scientists, so somehow atheists. Some claim that the Antichrist is taking over. Some claim that the Islam is the bad side, and the Christ is Jesus Christ is or the Christians are the right side, and so we face a lot of crisis and a lot of people claiming to know how to solve this. So there is Fridays for Futures claiming we should follow them. There is the Republicans, the right wing, or the freedom fighters claiming that they know how to solve the crisis and that we need freedom. And there is the Socialist Party claiming that we need to have ecologic socialism, so to limit the freedom of the individual in order to be able to save the ecosystem of the earth, which all is somehow there is some good in it, some right points and some bad points. So in Europe we have different movements. For example, Greta Thunberg. For example, Naomi Seibt claiming to be more rational than the Fridays for Future movement. We don't know. To have a solution to the crises we faced, first one should be able to point out the origin of all this crisis. So in my previous videos I explained that we must go back 3,000 or 5,000 years. Today I just want to focus on the last a few hundred years maybe. So Matrix 4 is announced to be released, if it's not delayed due to Corona, on the 20th of May next year. The 20th of May is also my birthday, and the 20th of May is also the birthday of the Metre-Convention that was held at that date. The perception of human beings, the perception of our science we use, the perception of our rational thinking we use, is the measurement. So while we are looking with our eyes, while we are listening with our ears, while we are smelling with our nose or tongue, we do measurements. After the French Revolution, the Metre-Convention tried to fix measures on how to agree, how to measure our reality. So today, in the beginning, it was also, I will place a link in the text to this video, so you can look up about the Metre-Convention. In the beginning there were 70 states. Today there are 102 nations agreeing to this measurement, which is the second of time, the meter of length, the kilogram of mass, the candela of light intensity, the Kelvin of temperature, the ampere of electric current, and the mole of quantity of substance. And today this in all nations of the world is agreement on how to perceive reality, on how to agree on reality. and what's wrong and what's right, what's fake news, what's correct information. So there's a long tradition that led finally to the Metre-Convention and to the idea to guarantee a justice and equality based on a unified standardized measurement. As you see, on top of this there is a second of time. So over thousands of years there is the movement that the question that time is the dominant measure in our universe, and the last fight about churches and science left churches to be the loser, and science took over to explain the universe, and they also took over to explain time. What is time? So today in all nations we agree on this kind of measurement, which include that on top time is running, and from that is derived the space, the kilogram, the mass, so materialized substance, electric current. So all of physics in general relativity, also as in quantum theory, is derived from the idea that in the beginning there is running time without anything else. So one can say today this is the God which all of science is praying to, something not living. As explained in the videos, in the prior videos, the main mistake is the idea that the world is something dead. So Newton, as well as Aristotle and Pythagoras, already noted that the universe is a living system. So the movements of planets and the movements in the sky we observed are driven by some loving system, by some God. You can call it God, or you can call it, I prefer to call it a living organism. So if you imagine the solar system to be like a molecule, and this molecule is part of a substance like blood, which is part of a bigger organism, a living system. So if you imagine a water molecule in your body, part of you, it is difficult to distinguish if this molecule is living or if it's dead, because all of you consists is somehow living. It's difficult to explain when exactly this happened. The wrong thought went into human thinking. If it's 3,000 or 5,000 years ago, but we pointed out that with this definition of time, today we define time like it is running. It is measured with atomic clocks, with the cesium atom. It's a frequency, but it doesn't matter if you define time to be a frequency of the electromagnetic forces within the cesium atom, or if you define time to be the Earth encircling Sun. So if you count time in days, or if you use, for example, this kind of clock, you can, well, this kind of clock is somehow different, because if you place it this way, a time is running because it is following the gravitational force, and if you place it that way, time is stopping. Now you can start time if you accelerate in this direction. then time will run in this direction, and if you accelerate over these directions, time will not move. So in this sense, time is three-dimensional, but also time measured with atomic clocks is depending on gravitational force. So if you take this hourglass, if you measure time like this, and if you move this clock into a higher atmosphere where the gravitational force is lower than on the surface of Earth because it's more far away and it's declining with the square to the to the distance, but also atomic clocks show a different time flow depending on the height in the atmosphere. So if you have use an atomic clock and move it away from the surface of Earth to higher levels, the gravitational force will be lower and the time will run faster on atomic clocks, while time will run slower on this gravitational clock. So it's just an inverse proportional concept. Anyway, this is to demonstrate that time always depends on a movement. So one can say quite easy that you can observe time only in physics in rational observation if you have something moving. So the idea that time, the idea in this measurement system, that time could run without movement. So this is especially the mistake. The idea that time could run without movement and move to detect or to measure movement, of course, you need to measure length in space. So you need the measurement of a meter of space. This is a belief, so somehow it's a dictate that you say, okay, we set a given time to be the king, the cesium atom or the Earth encircling sun, and from that everything is derived. But this is the main point. Also Newton and Einstein pointed out that time must be proportional to space, and if you define time correct, then you don't need the mass, you don't need the gravitational force, you don't need all of this, because you can express everything just with time and space. For this, the most simple explanation would be maybe in some videos before I explain that you need to use a new mathematics, which is defining P to be the number 1. It's the relation between, if you call this meter of space and this second of time, it is just the relation between space and time. So second per meter is the inverse of what we know meter per second to be velocity. So to explain this from a different point of view, imagine a clock. As you know, maybe you use the pointer for the minutes. So this is a pointer, it's going around, and after 1 hour, this is half an hour, and after 1 hour it returns to the position it took, and then you can say, well, this is our basic instrument to measure time and space. So if the pointer goes this length in space, so if you measure this circumference, the circumference of this circle, of the end point, of the ending point of the pointer, then you have this circumference to be at the same time 1 hour, and also you can say this 1 hour is 1 meter. So with this kind of definition, you set into relation space and time, because always you need space to measure time, or length of space to measure length of time, and length of time to measure length of space. In this example, you can see that due to the length of the pointer, you can put into relation space and time by free choice. So you could say this is time and this is space, or this is space and this is time, whatever. So there are infinite possibilities to focus the or to define the relation between space and time. Anyway, they are proportional, so 1 meter is 1 rotation and 1 second is 1 rotation, for example. So this is always proportional, and you can define or by defining 1 meter to be 1 second in these terms, you just focus everything on one fixed diameter. But this is here comes in the general relativity, understanding that time and space are proportional makes as time is then a concept of frequency, a concept of repeating events. That means in this example, space is curved, so you would have to measure or define space not as a straight line, but as a curved line only. So you can't measure space that way with for example, with a laser light, you assume to be a straight line or whatever. So in these terms, the mathematics or the geometry comes into part, so that's why we need to use general relativity as having this is the length of space setting in relation to the length of time. So this is why the magical pi is second per meter is the fundamental origin of the theory of everything. And by where we go? By changing or first of all, to solve any problem, any crisis in the world, first of all, scientists as well as politicians as well as religious leaders must point out the origin of the crisis and must realize that we only can solve any of these crises or find a way to save the world or save our souls by working out the new definition of space and time. For example, I made this in my papers. I suggested to define within the constitutions, within the laws, today the meter is defined as the length a photon travels in a given time period, defined by the frequency special property of the cesium atom. but to define and to introduce also the spiritual and the feeling senses into the measurement, one have to define that the space and time must be proportional, like defining, for example, a meter of length is the duration. A meter of length is the length a photon is traveling a straight line within 1 second, and a second is the duration a photon needs to travel a straight line of 1 meter. So you have the inverse proportion, like for example, if you have the fixed speed of light, speed of course, say whatever c is 300,000 or whatever, or c is 1, the speed of light, then the second should be the inverse proportional of the speed, and the meter of length should be, for example, the speed. So doing this definition and understanding this definition, building a new science on this definition, we can overcome these 7 base measurements. We can also call them the 7 deadly sins, and return to a rational scientific model which depends only on space and time and on the dialectic or the action-reaction principle of Newton, as well as the rational mathematics of Pythagoras and maybe people in mathematicians in ancient Egypt. So this is there is no way to work around that, and after doing so we will see that as well Fridays for Futures is wrong as well, Obama is wrong, Trump is wrong, China is wrong, everyone is wrong, and 7.5 billion people today are wrong, because 7.5 billion people using this kind of world model, and there's a lot of fight about what is right and wrong, and this is due to the fact that using this kind of science, everyone can use his own time and playing the God mode, or the doing using a perception object-oriented perception, which is like looking at the world and playing God, so a narcissistic point of view, while this kind of or agreement on this kind of perception of the world is like a subject-oriented approach, which also I will link this below the video, which Arne Kjellman tried to introduce already in 2014 and 2017 to, well, yeah, one can say this is an object-oriented approach and this is a subject-oriented approach. And this is the old world model we use, which is of a war in communication, a war of information, and this is something, a new world model that we must turn to in order to solve problems with rational thinking. Thank you.